I'm Summer Huntington of Mace, Vinyasa, and Shala, and today I'll be talking about side swings and different families of heavy club exercises. So I got my start over 15 years ago in training with heavy clubs. My coach was actually the person that invented the TacFit club, and I trained with him for a number of years. And since then, I have evolved my understanding of club swinging to integrate training like a warrior. I've also added my kinesiology background, my yoga background, and of course, Mace Vinyasa. So what you're going to see today is really just how I think about clubs and really putting them into different families. So in previous videos, I've covered my grinds and my dynamic movements. In this video, I really want to touch on the family of swinging. So when you're thinking about swinging clubs, you can swing single-handed or two-handed, and you can do a front swing or a side swing. So the swing is the category of exercise. It's a ballistic exercise where we're doing strong hip snap, and it's kind of like a plyometric, and it really requires quite a bit of coordination to be able to do it properly. So I'll demo quickly just for the sake of understanding the different families. I'll demonstrate a single-handed front swing. So I start here in my silverback position. I pack my shoulders here. I preload, and then here is a front swing, single-handed front swing. I've got full hip snap, meaning my legs are straight at the knees. My glutes are engaged to the top, and this is similar to a kettlebell swing. It's just I have an off-centered load here, so it forces that contralateral core activation in my obliques. This might transition into a front swing in order position. That makes it a little bit more challenging because it's a compound exercise. I must have two elements in order to do that successfully. I gotta have my front swing and I need to have my order position with elbow married to the rib. Now, when I teach heavy clubs, I work with athletes that have no experience generally in kettlebell swings, and they have no experience in working with leverage tools. And so I personally like to make sure my athletes can clear a front swing before adding more degrees of freedom, such as a side swing. So let's analyze the degrees of freedom required to perform a proper two-handed front swing. So when I'm looking at the 6 degrees of freedom, again, this is something I teach at my certification seminars. I've got a heavy club seminar, my first 2-day, happening in Seattle this October, and I do lead these virtually throughout the year, so you can always check Shala workshops page for all of those events. So let's look at degrees of freedom. So here, I'm standing in a neutral spine, my mountain pose. I come into my pitch and heave pattern. So my heaving pattern is I'm moving down relative to my starting position in space, and a little bit of pitch here as the trunk comes forward. Super critical here to get elbow lockout. Again, this is important in the 6 mechanics of swinging clubs. You want one hand closest to the knob, one hand closest to the handle. Find your sit back, pack the shoulders, elbows remain straight. We preload, we front swing. So I like to have my athletes clear that front swing first, again, before doing a side swing, which has an element of sway and rotation in the trunk. So again, look how simple this is. Front swing. Front swing to order. Again, I like to have the knob close to the bottom here so that I'm training my arm to be a 90-degree angle. What I find is when I'm here, I'm bringing in more bicep engagement. So I like to have it here. I know I always get questions on this because Mark and I teach it a little bit differently. I like to have it here. And in a fighting scenario, you're not gonna have time to switch your hands. So get good at both ways and train like a warrior. I love your critical thinking though. So here we go. We come to our order position, rotate elbows, kiss both ribs, cast with full elbow lock below the nose, cast, swing, catch, removing it from the center here, through the legs, off to the side, here. Center, cast, swing, catch, off to the side. Center, cast, swing, catch. Eventually I might add a striking pattern here if I want to make it more compound. So again, I like to have categories of training. Again, I come from a kinesiology background, so I like to build from simple to complex to get my athletes into flow state, switch sides dynamically. And so as we layer on complexity, we've got front swing, only 2 degrees of freedom, my heave and my pitch. Elbows are locked, I'm clearing that solid front swing. I transition from my front swing into my second exercise, my two-handed guard position. Move back to center, front swing, catch, landmark 1, landmark 2, dynamic movement, back to that landmark 1. Landmark 2, dynamic swing. In the downswing, super critical here, you want to keep the muzzle close to the floor versus, when it flies up like that, you're missing an opportunity to engage the glutes here. You want to keep that hip hinge so we stay in the glutes instead of the hamstrings. Maybe you want to add a little cast here, making it more of a compound exercise. Shoulder cast striking pattern, lifting pattern here. All right, so that's a 15-pounder. I'm gonna encourage anyone watching this video, if you're only doing two-handed front swings with a 10-pound, you need to go up in weight, you need to regress the exercise. And I encourage you, even women, I'm developing a program for my students, women and men, with heavy clubs. You can swing a 25-pound club pretty easily if you're just doing front swings and front swing to order. So when you're trying to go up and load, obviously you definitely want to follow a program and build up progressively. But if you've been training with me for a few years and you've never tried swinging with a 15 or a 20, let's bump you up in weight. Disclaimer. Don't hurt yourself. Okay, so here we go. I preload, I find my shoulder pack, elbow lock, push the club behind me. I might just start with here, just a little front swing, keeping that lat activation. When my club comes too high, notice how I'm pitching my body. I'm exaggerating here, but pitching my body in order to get that height. I want to keep my lats engaged so they're pre-recruited when I pull it into my order position. Center, cast, swing, catch, order. Back to center, cast, swing, catch. Switch sides. Preload, elbow lock. Find your sit back, crown to coccyx alignment. I'm not looking here and cranking my neck. I'm tucking my chin to find that crown to coccyx alignment. Front swing. So in a workout, if my first exercise is my front swing, which you'll see in my new program that's coming out, we start with most simple. We layer on the next landmark. In exercise 2 and 3, we might insert a primary and secondary focus. Again, this all comes back to program design and learning how to intelligently design programs with leverage tools. Cast, swing, catch, order position, off to the side. I pull it to the center, cast with straight elbow, swing, catch, I catch it off to the one side. Center, cast, swing, and catch. With my arm at 90 degrees, lats engaged, core engaged. Always place it down with control. So again, my athletes teach things a little differently. I like people to have a solid front swing and a single-handed front swing before they attempt a side swing. Because what I found is people that have never swung anything, they never swung a kettlebell, which is a lot of my yoga athletes and my midlife adults that are a little deconditioned when they start with me. It puts their spine at a little bit of a risk for injury to ask them to do more degrees of freedom than just heave and pitch. So let's put our kinesiology hats on and look at the degrees of freedom required to do a single-handed side swing with a light load. So heave and pitch, yaw is trunk rotation, and sway. So now I've moved from 2 degrees of freedom in that simple front swing into 4 of the 6 degrees of freedom that there are. The only other ones that we would have would be like a tilt, but I digress. A tilt and a, well, we'll just call it a tilt. Okay, so we find our sit back and our pitch, heave and search, or sorry, heave and pitch. We find our trunk rotation and then a little tiny sway. Side swing. Looks a little dynamic. When people first swing a heavy club, their tendency is to do this or to do just basically a straight arm swing and then kind of not really knee bend or not really sit back. So we want to get that element of sitting the hips back a lot so that we train the glutes. This is actually closed hip conditioning. There's no external rotation in my femur, but the rotation comes from my spine, my thoracic spine. So here we go. Next progression, side swing order. Cast, side swing catch, order position. Cast, side swing catch, order. Neutral wrist, elbow pinch to rib. finding that little sit back. Cast, swing, and catch. Cast, swing, and catch. You can start from the ground, 2 different entries. So here's my ground start, side swing to order, or just, this is a straight up side swing with elbow lock. Least complex, this is more adding that layer of complexity, making it a compound exercise. Order, cast, swing, catch, order, cast, swing, catch, order. Again, can you see the 4 out of the 6 degrees of freedom here? The only 2 that are not present, there's no surge and there's no lateral bend, there's no tilt, okay? But there are still 4 out of the 6 degrees of freedom, which from a motor control perspective and adding in all the mechanics of club swinging, that's a lot for a beginner to understand right away. And so I think people can be successful in it. I just take a slightly different approach. I err on the side of caution and make sure people have that clean front snap, front swing first. So if you're ever taking one of my programs and you haven't cleared a front swing, let's regress you to a front swing. All right, let's look at a 2-handed one with a 15. All right, so now I'm adding a little bit more volume, a little bit more load here is the variable that I'm changing. So place my club in the center, one hand closest to the knob, one hand closest to the muzzle here. And I'm starting off to this side because I want my elbow to land here to get that 90-degree bend. So here we go. Pack the shoulders, side hip root, front swing, or sorry, side swing. Side swing. Side swing order. Cast, side swing, catch. Things to look out for. We want this muzzle to stay low to the ground on the downswing, which keeps you honest in your core. When I swing my muzzle all crazy like that, where am I leaking power? I'm leaking power in my shoulder pack, and I'm losing an opportunity to recruit more load in my thoracic rotation. So here, when it's low, the obliques are firing the whole way through, and lats are firing to keep it stable. When it's here, woo, obliques turned off, lats turned off. It's fun, but I lost an opportunity for core activation. You could start from up top if you want, starting in your 2-handed guard position, cast, swing, catch. We could start down here. I always like to show there's multiple places you can start. Some people like to start from the ground. Some people like to start in order. Cast, swing, catch. Again, it comes down to like motor control, coordination, timing, speed, agility. These are all of the performance aspects that we're training with heavy clubs and leverage tools. In conventional training, generally our goal is to increase strength or increase power by moving some object in a certain path to build more muscle. So the result in conventional training, we get bigger muscles. And then when we're training dynamically with heavy clubs, we're looking at a lot of different functional movement patterns and also the 4 primal movement patterns that make us human: throwing patterns, striking patterns, blocking, and lifting patterns. Let's go into one more demo, 2-handed side swing to order with a cast with a 25-pound club. And again, if you're a woman or you haven't jumped up in weight, just observe or use the same weight as I go through this demo. So we start with our club in between our 2 feet. I'm gonna have my left hand closest to the knob, right hand closest to the muzzle. Always, how we do one thing's how we do everything, so always approach your club in the same exact way. It's just like a yoga practice, like you go into it with perfect alignment at the same time, takes the guesswork out of it, allows you to have quality form, proper stability to limit your injury potential. Side hip root. We're actually going the wrong way. Side swing. Straight arms, muzzle close to the ground. Side swing, 2-handed order, cast, side swing, catch. Keeping knees back behind the toes, cast, side swing, catch. Cast, side swing, catch. Maybe add a 2-handed cast, great for core and shoulders. That's adding in that striking pattern. Switch sides. Side swing, full hip snap, trunk rotation, little sway here, Side swing to order, two-handed order, two-handed guard. There's nowhere else that I am except for very present here as I'm swinging my clubs. Not thinking about what I have to make for dinner or how my kids are doing. I have a leverage tool in front of me. There's a consequence and I don't want to get hurt. And I want to train stamina, train endurance, and then bring in those other aspects of performance, like coordination, speed, agility, timing, reaction time. These are the things that make training like a warrior happen. So when a stressful situation comes, and I have the ability to observe, orient, decide, and act quickly without going into a freeze, that's when I train like a warrior. We call this the OODA loop in our workshops and in our seminars. Observe, orient, decide, and act. And when you train with a purpose and you train that timing, coordination, agility, proprioceptive awareness, you're training with leverage tools, you're adding in 4 degrees of freedom instead of just boring 1. No shade on conventional. I do a little conventional to keep the strength up, but I love my dynamic work. But when we train with a purpose, something shifts internally. I'll say that again. When we train with a purpose, something shifts in our nervous system that allows us to build confidence, build better structure, become more competent at tools or at tasks that require leverage tools. So think chopping wood, lifting groceries, lifting your kids, playing with your kids, throwing your kids. When we have competence in our lives, that reflects in our internal experience as well. So I hope you learned a little something about the difference between a front swing and a side swing. I'll cover this in full detail at my Heavy Club seminars that happen throughout the year. First one's coming up here in October in person in Seattle. Get yourself in, early registration if you'd like, and I'll see you at our next either retreat, seminar, or the release of the new Heavy Clubs program. Thanks so much for tuning in. Drop a comment below. See you soon.